Well, big crowd. Thank you very much for joining us today for this conversation. Appreciate it. We'll start 1 minute early, especially for the last session. I know you guys are like, get over with this, be done with this. But let's go home. Yeah, there's a good comment. So I'll actually be quite quick here with this discussion. I'm going to go over a few different points talking about, strategy with, aligning your business to some cloud offerings. This is not a sales presentation at all. And we're going to spend the majority of the time talking with the panelists. We have some prepared questions we have for them just to try to get a different perspective on some of these topics and hear from different people. So kind of the agenda for today, give you a little bit of an overview on the talking points that we're going to go over, and this is the plan. Spend about 10 minutes going over some points that I've prepared. Then we'll start in with the cloud panel, and then at that point, we'll go into some Q&A from you folks. So that's kind of the plan. The end of the presentation, though, and this is the most important part, I think, is that they'll be collecting those questionnaires to give you $5 Starbucks card. And so you're still going to have to pay for your coffee. I don't think there's a $5 coffee anymore, but that's all right. But yeah, and where I'm going to really start this, so today, just for the mic check and all the other things that are going on, we have Rita, Mike, and Zenu who are joining us today on our panel, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and state their role. So maybe we'll start with Zenu.
Hello, my name is Zenu Sarcadi. I work for Quest. I'm Director of Technology, and I have a background in federal and in state.
My name is Rita Goss, and I'm the Chief Information Officer for the California Conservation Corps.
Hooray. And my name is Mike Dillon. I'm the CTO of Quest. Been with Quest for almost 20 years. So I've gone through the whole managed services and cloud piece and part. So it should be a good session.
Yeah, it definitely will. And we'll be asking some of the questions specific to the roles, too. So they are similar questions our panel's going to talk about, but kind of try to align them a little bit to that. This is the only sales slide in the entire presentation. I'm not going to be, we're not beating down your door or nothing, but I just kind of want to give a little background on Quest. In business over 30 years. Some of you know started as Quest Media and Supplies, way back out of Tim Burke's garage back in the day. Talking about some of the customers that we work with in the different verticals, at least that I work with personally. We have government to state, education. You have private, but then you also have a lot of the people that we work with is on the contracting side of the, government contracts and state contractors as well. So every different vertical, healthcare, finance, you name it, we're involved there. One of the unique things that I find about Quest is that how we offer most of our products and services and everything as a service, from application development to services like IaaS, all the way down to anything that we offer, we can offer as a service. And so that's key for our customers for cost reasons, for a lot of things. I manage the application development group at Quest, so that's the most interesting thing to me. The other stuff is like, call somebody else. But that actually is the fun part of what I do. So I work with customers on designing solutions for them. Now, whether it's an existing application that maybe they want to deliver a different way, or maybe it's a new application that they want to develop, that's where I would get engaged. And that's my focus at Quest for the state business as well as for private organizations. The only thing I'm going to go over here on the sales side, which is important to me, is that Quest offers a variety of different programs, and these programs are very valuable. They have, we have DR programs, application security, cloud assessments, that cover the entire spectrum that really help open your eyes on what's available out there, what kind of challenges you may face with those types of migrations, and it's a way for us to get engaged to work with you on some of those things, and those are offered as complimentary to a lot of our customers, those initial engagements. So if you have any interest in some of our programs, a lot of them are really valuable, and we invest a lot of money into getting you the results. Please talk to somebody with Quest after this meeting, and we can go through some of those details. And that's the majority of everything we're going to talk about on the sales or about Quest. If you have any questions about some of the services or anything, feel free to ask any of us. This is going to be the main area that we're going to focus our panel on, and that's the business challenges side. I find that these are what's driving a lot of organizations to the cloud just because of the either staffing concerns or there's a variety. And I'm not just going to read off this because I wanted to really talk about one of the use cases that we've been working with recently, not mentioning any, hopefully there's not somebody in the room, but We're working with the SAE organization to deliver an application in a different way. And what they needed is they didn't want to maintain the application anymore. They did not want to maintain the databases anymore. They didn't want to deal with licensing. All they wanted is an application delivered to them. And in order for them to get to the next version of the application required a lot of other things for them. And so they're just like, forget that. Can you guys deliver this to us as a service? And we were able to do that, deliver it as a service. Now all they have to worry about is managing the SLA with us for that application and using the application. And it kind of just gets rid of all the other nonsense that's involved from the security aspect, because that can be part of the SLA, to how it's built out, to the location of the application for latency, for things like that. So it was a real good success story from our perspective, because it was like a state organization. They needed a new way to deliver it, a new pricing model for the application, and we were able to bundle that together in a solution for them. And it met, I would say, 3 of these. The ever-increasing compliance and security risks. They needed more layers on top of that in order to ensure compliance with some of the regulations. They couldn't provide that necessarily within their department, so that actually was bundled in. You have things like, you don't want to maintain maybe the legacy applications in-house. That, kind of fit right into this case study as well as the life cycle of the applications. One of the big concerns is when they upgrade this application later, okay, now I don't have to deal with it. You're providing it as a service. So I'm just, consuming it. And that was a better model for that particular use case. One of the other things that we found, though, when people are migrating applications to the cloud that I thought was interesting, and Rita's going to talk about a little bit more on our panel, is about licensing aspects. Some of our customers are trying to consume databases in a different way, and they don't want to spend $50,000 on SQL Enterprise. Maybe they want to consume those services, but they don't necessarily want to cough up all the licensing pieces and how you align that with your users. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But those are some of the big challenges that we see with why people are moving over to the cloud right now. And this applies to state government as well as to private organizations. I'm almost done here, and then we're going to get on the panel. It's not that much longer. There's only like 13 slides, so don't worry. Some of the answers that we see here are, the one that I'm going to highlight again are just a couple here. The data center space and cost considerations. We find that some people are leveraging our services. They may have development groups in different countries. They may have, part of their team on the East Coast. They have latency problems with those applications. They don't want to develop another data center in another place. This allows them to span multiple data centers without any kind of investment in that. For partners with Quest, where we're in 25 locations right now, it'd be easy to spin one up on the East Coast to support those users. So that's a big concern here on how this allows you to really grow your offerings to your customers, which are the users really in a lot of instances, without building that out. I would say, another big piece of it, though, here that I want to talk about before we move on is this one, the cloud options, the on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, hybrid. Those are all, legitimate things. I think we all understand those. We've been talking about them for 10 years. But what I find is that none of our customers fit those even perfectly. They're, a hybrid of even the hybrid, for example, to where we may be providing the application, but they may be doing the DBA services, but we're supporting the security. So all these different roles that they wanted to meet is the actual cloud offering. And I've actually even seen it to where that we offer that type of cloud offering at their location. So it's our equipment, our infrastructure, our support, all that. They just want to consume it a different way. So I don't want to be tied into the box of those 4 different ways, because I actually find that there's hundreds of different ways that you can deliver those, and that's something that the panel will talk about a little bit more. Some key elements of the cloud adoption. What I saw this was really interesting. This study. This is from RightScale State of the Cloud report, and it really shows that there's the multi-cloud and the hybrid cloud are, it's not, nobody can find one single area to put all their, it's not this private cloud and we got everything there. What I find is a good approach for some customers who are looking at cloud adoption is not look at it from the entire enterprise perspective of, okay, I got to truckload this whole thing to the cloud necessarily. Truckload an application specifically. Maybe align that SLA for that application with that one specifically in there, and that makes it a lot easier to manage, but then you also find that you're potentially leveraging a lot of different providers. So the roles of some of your staff may change to where it's not necessarily they're managing that application. Maybe they're managing the SLAs of the providers to ensure that they're met. But you won't find one single solution that will work for all of your applications. So I like to divide the cloud strategy by application, but I'm also in application development. So, maybe that's just me. We're also going to talk about in the panel a little bit about how this affects the staff. I think that'll be another thing that'll be interesting to talk about. And then lastly, before we start, I think there's one more before we start digging in here. A lot of what I found too is that when we're working with migrating customers to the cloud, we'll migrate either, at Quest, we'll migrate an entire enterprise. We're doing one right now in San Francisco, and we're just migrating the entire enterprise to a different location. And they found that immediate benefit from that is the processing power during some of the load times. So they had a lot of physical and a lot of built out in their infrastructure. Pushing it to a cloud that was designed for that actually gives them more power in off times than they had in the past because of the way it's aggregated. And so they've actually seen some benefits by moving to that just because they can do some of their night processing better because of the lower activity of some of their other servers and devices. So there's subtle benefits on your design side by bringing more things to one provider in that instance, but then there's also benefits of isolating it by application. And that's how we found it. But also, again, I'm going to highlight, our panel is going to discuss one other thing that I think is the most critical here, and Rita has some good points about it. And that is, and I've been involved in this from the customer side. My background is I was in the financial services industry as CTO. I actually migrated my entire enterprise in that industry to the Quest cloud. And then we went through all of that. So I've been involved with Quest for almost 15 years from the customer side. And I've seen it from that side on the difficulties of bringing applications and services, especially in the finance industry, which has some similarities with state because of the regulations and stuff we had to deal with. But one of the things, though, that I think will be key is the exit strategy. How do you get out? How do you leave that provider? If you look at the exit strategies of some of the large providers today, they're non-existent. So, Rita will talk a little bit more, and I think the others will talk a little bit more about that too. That's critical. Build your exit strategy when you're doing that because it'll protect your data or your application. And, this is probably the most difficult part right here is, covering all of your bases here. You're on the hook, but you've just pushed that application out to the cloud. You got an SLA with the provider, but if that data is breached, it's still your reputation, even though it's somebody else. So how do you manage that? Those are kind of difficult, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the panel too. And a lot of organizations, they don't want to hand off this portion, but I see that there's a ton of them that are now, to where they're saying, okay, you guys manage the security of this application, even if maybe we're not managing the application at all. And it kind of takes that out, and that can be a cloud offering as well. So there's those pieces too to cover some of your compliance and risk. Now we're going to start with some of the questions to our panel, and we're going to really highlight them. And unfortunately, we didn't sit in the right order. That's going to really bother me. But it's just my personality. Sorry.
It's the developers.
It's the developers. It has to follow this chain. That's right. So it's not working. But we'll start with Zenu because I want to take some. We're going to take these questions and ask from their perspective what they see. And the first one is going to be, what are the challenges with migrating, homegrown applications to the cloud from your perspective?
It's just the thought of the cloud. When you take something that's been homegrown, you know about it, you know how to control it, and it's a sense of ownership. Well, when you talk to someone about what the cloud is, that to them becomes, well, I can't control that. So now it's, I have this risk, or, oh my goodness, somebody's going to steal my data. So what I've seen in my previous engagements is, what customers will do is we'll over design our security. We'll take a homegrown application that may not run as efficient as something that an Oracle or what have you might have developed from an efficiencies perspective, and we'll cake it on top with different ways of auditing, different ways of monitoring, and ultimately the performance to the user has now been degraded. So I've seen that a lot of times the cloud doesn't fail. It's the thought that, well, it has to be so secure that's the failing point. So.
Yeah, good point. I like that. What about you, Rita, on the migration of the homegrown applications? What challenges have you had?
So I wanted to get a quick poll here, quick. Who are here that works for an IT department with 20 staff or less, other than my own staff who's sitting here?
They had two hands back there.
Okay. All right. So most of the challenges, especially for small and medium-sized IT departments with the state is that they don't have the resources and money to migrate their legacy applications. So that's one of the challenges. And with the CCC, when we first delve into the cloud implementation, that is one of our challenge. We have a recruitment system that's 30 years old, and it needed to be replaced. I was given a budget of 100,000. So you're going to do this with 100,000 with no staff. And so we went to do an informal request for information, did our market research, and most of the applications, custom applications are cuts, but within our premise, if we were to develop it in-house, it was going to cost us between $250,000 to $1 million. So, and it was going to take more than a year. Well, the issues that we have is, one, we didn't have enough resources, we didn't have the funding, plus we don't have the resources to tie for 1 year. Our management says you've got 3 months, SMEs and everything, so you have 3 months or 6 months the most. So what we did is we look at cloud computing and what can cloud do for us. It was a lot of research. At first, you have to make sure there is a lot of challenges, and some of the challenges that we've been doing this for the last 3.5, 4 years, meaning we've been doing analysis and investigating, and some of our challenges are the scope and understanding of the different cloud models and services. As like you said, there's different flavors of cloud, and all the vendor solutions, they're going to come to you and they have different flavors. So that's one of our challenges, is to find out which one works for you. So it's not an apple to apple comparison. If you have a legacy access database, you can't say, what can I do to just put it up there? I mean, there could be a solution for that. You could do an infrastructure as a service, or just house that access application to a shared services. The next thing we had problems with is addressing the fear and the myths surrounding the cloud. I think that's a lot of what people, has a problem with. And I can say that because we did it, it can be done and it can be successful. We did win an award with this cloud implementation that we did. So it can be done by a small IT department or a big IT department. The myths of that are the security. That's one of the myths. One of the things that we found is that people are saying, like I said, if we don't touch it, it's not secure. But when our ISO and us, we looked at our environment, it is much safer to go to the cloud than within what we're doing, because we don't have the staffing to do confidential information. It's not just the technology about security, but the process in place of securing that data. So what does the CCC have the staff to work with in a data center to secure that data, to be compliant with either HIPAA or PII? And we don't. So that's why that's one of the things that it is more secure for us to go to the cloud. The myths about the technology knowledge, and of course the cost. Sometimes you say, you know what, going to the cloud may cost, because right now, if I'm doing an access development, I may just be paying one contractor to do the implementation. But then when you go to the cloud, you're going to see all these licenses that say, oh my God, now we have 300 users, we're going to pay for these licenses. So when you have to go to a cloud, you have to have a cloud strategy. So for smaller departments who may have just one application or two applications, you really need to think about, is it worth it to go to the cloud? If you don't have any staffing, maybe it is. But don't look at just the cost, because when you do just the cost-to-cost comparison, what you support now, what you're going to be paying later, there's it doesn't match. Just like you can't do an apple to an apple. You have to make sure that you are able to substantiate why there will be an operational cost instead of a capital cost in terms of the cloud. And then you put the benefits in it, and in the long term, you get your business done, because sometimes you don't meet your business requirements. You continue to do this, but you're missing a lot of stuff. You're missing a lot of your function that maybe, you're spending so much time. So in our situation, our recruiters were spending more time calling people and doing data entry. When we moved to the cloud, of course, now they're more spending time with core members, potential core members, to talk about what the core is. So there's, that advantage that is not money-wise, but more for the people that we are doing business with or we're our service to.
Yeah, yeah, good point. What about you, Mike, on the homegrown apps? What have you seen?
You know, going back to what Rita talks about, I think it's a good time to talk about capabilities that you're looking for versus just migrating data and migrating some existing application. It's a good time to really think about that. Your support, model, the impact to the rest of your business units. There's a lot of capabilities, so every time people talk to me about cloud, I always want to talk about capabilities. Versus if you just go to the cloud, just say, well, I want IaaS. I see a lot of people transitioning to that thought, and what they're really doing is buying a server versus a different capability. So if it's a security capability that you want to improve on, or if it's an application capability, or a support capability, have your groups think through that thought versus just migrate an application. I see a lot of people just try to migrate an application, and that could be pretty expensive. I think probably what Rita saw too, because you're literally just paying for the whole stack now. You're not really buying an outcome. So if you could look at it, I want to buy an outcome, that's a very profitable way for you to think of it versus just replace my physical stuff here on my site with your stuff in the cloud, one for one. That's expensive.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a totally different thought process because you're just looking at the requirements. That's what I see. Go back to the requirements there. So now, next question is how, in Zenu, from your perspective, preparing your organization, preparing for cloud adoption and the changes in your organization, how is that going to affect, from your perspective, how you adjust those when you're moving to the cloud with an app or your whole enterprise?
I think an important focus is what are you doing with your internal processes? How is your consumers, how is your customers, how's your business units going to now ingest that new service? Are they trained? Is your internal staff, do they understand where the lines of delineation is? What process are they supposed to follow should something occur? A lot of times it's just the thought of, well, let's just move it up there, it'll be somebody else's problem. It's not, because we go from being managers or owners of a specific piece of technology to now custodians of a service level, and it's a responsibility for us to communicate how that process and how that model works internally. So there's a lot of need and attention that should be done there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Rita, what about you for the organizational changes for cloud adoption?
So the biggest thing I think our challenge is the business process transformation. I think that's what everybody in this state has a problem with. Our process of doing personal transaction or accounting processes, how do you change that and adapt it to the new cloud service? So for example, online signature, we are all using paper forms. How do you do that? So like I said, if we just putting an access application that we're still doing paper form and putting in the cloud, yes, it is going to be very expensive, and people will, users doesn't see what's happening outside, just as long as they can just input their stuff in and do the reports. But when the business process transformation is the hardest or the challenge.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Where's that big jug of vodka you had?
That's later.
Here you go.
So yeah, business process transformation is one of our challenges. We spend a lot of time in gathering requirements and then mapping the requirements to the right vendor, which we will talk later.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have to do an IT, sorry about my
No
voice here. IT roadmap, it's important. If your department, your IT department decide we're gonna take on this cloud strategy, you need to be very careful and be aware that you have to have a policies in place because your users, not in IT department, will be going out and getting all kinds of cloud services out there. And I think the biggest problem with security is when you cannot inventory your assets out in the cloud because everybody else is just taking the cloud services. So IT, I think, is very important that IT has to be ready and have a policy in place to make sure that they can account for their assets.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
I think from an organization at times, just to sit back a little bit and say, what do we have in the cloud now? Because we all run something probably out of the cloud now of some sort. If it's a WebEx thing or Meraki deal or whatever you got. I mean, there's tons of things that we do in the cloud now. I think that helps people kind of get a little bit more used to it. I think at times I see it to be people go into defensive modes a lot. Versus more of an embracing mode. So look at your organization, their behavior and their concerns and fears, and each group's got to kind of figure that out on their own. Everyone's got their own culture, some of their own issues that they have to look at. So I think that's probably a big deal with it. Explain to people too roles and responsibilities a little bit more. You may have to, in the state, you may have to deal with a little bit more of a your role, maybe like the union conversation comes up at times. What are we going to be doing? That's my job, that type of stuff. We really haven't, when we roll up applications to the cloud type things, it's really to help people out, and that doesn't mean to replace jobs. But that is a big fear out there with a lot of people. So look at your culture, look at your organization, talk about it. And then also I think when you go through your organizational processes, kind of be prepared a little bit. The cloud company, whoever you go with, may be asking you questions that you may not be ready to answer. Like security is a good one, especially like if we're tied to HIPAA, the state standards that came out at the end of last year, PaaS, IaaS, and SaaS type of standards. That's going to probably make us ask more security questions than you may have dealt with on your own, because it's in some sort of a service level agreement or some sort of a contract. And in the state standards that came out last year had penalties. So that's why there's going to be those questions. So from an organization perspective, just be prepared. Probably people are going to be asking about that, and it's because of those. From a vendor perspective or from a partner perspective, we want to ask and say, hey, where are we with security? Where are you with change management? Where are you with those type of processes? Not everybody's the same, and so, but you've got to somehow get onto the same page with it. So organizational speaking, those are probably the two biggest things, is understand from your people's feelings and where they're at with it and the culture, and then just be aware that there'll probably be some other questions like Rita's talked about too, security questions and those things. It may be driven from what you need, and it's also probably driven from the state standards.
And I just wanted to add something
Yeah,
about
please.
our staff. It's funny because we actually were able to ask for more position by going to the cloud than keeping our legacy system. So that,
that's a good- that's
it's
a good
because of the benefit. If they're just looking at the legacy application doing things, but now you're saying, all those Excel spreadsheets that you don't know, you think you just have this one legacy application, but then there's 100 Excel spreadsheets around, 50 Access databases, and we're going to consolidate that. This is the reason why we need more people, even though it's going to the cloud. So it's important that with organizational change management, you have to have the strategy, a roadmap, and then the department committed to using the cloud. It's not, you have to say, should I only be doing this application in the cloud, or am I going to doing a bunch of them? So because one of the challenges with the cloud too is the interfacing of your application. So you got to have that strategy.
Yeah. Just productivity all of a sudden changes. Not to say that you weren't productive before, but your energy kind of goes to maybe versus gridlock areas or concern areas to maybe more productivity areas. Yeah. So it's been very positive. Once again, our perspective has been to help people, not necessarily to replace people.
And sure. One of the things that also was very helpful for us is the change management, like you said. Change management is very, very important because now you're going to kind of map your business to what the cloud offering is. And so if there's something in the cloud that changes, because it is a service provider, you have to be able to map it and say, okay, what is it going to do for my organization because we're using their services. So, it's one of those things that in a homegrown application, you really don't have change management. They call the help desk and say, hey, can you add more fields here? So those are the kind of things that may change. Your business process will change. So.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good point.
I'm not sure. Service level agreements come into real play and I say that role play kind of because like Rita just mentioned about the change management. We all probably talk about service level agreements internally, but how do they really get applied? Well, when there's money and service level agreements applied to that, that really brings out that service level agreement. So it's been positive. I mean, do you end up where you start off with? No, there's always some sort of adjustments along the way, but it's been all positive.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I've worked with too on both sides of this, and this is the next question, is working with a mixed model workforce, working with your in-house team and potentially project consultants, because it could be on the partner side, could be on the vendor side. Zenu, I mean, give us your background on that one.
So this one was interesting. In my former world, again, we outsourced the majority of our infrastructure, if not all of it. And coming from a federal world, that is a significant change, because people who are in the aerospace world, well, they do the same thing for 30, 40, 50 years. They retire from there. Their kids retire from there. So when we went through the effort of outsourcing things, it was a very complex discussion. Not because the technology itself would fail, but because we didn't pay attention enough at the human capital side. We didn't mature. We didn't show them that this isn't this isn't a discussion of you're not bringing value. This is an opportunity for you to grow in your capabilities today.
Right. Right.
We often talk about aligning our respective departments or companies to the industry, but how often do we talk about aligning our workforce to where the industry is going?
Yes.
At the end of the day, as managers, I would tell managers, stop being a manager and be more of a leader. That way you can be more influential and positive towards your workforce.
Agreed. What about you, Rita, on the managing that mixed model workforce?
Actually, it's very interesting because, the first thing when you go to cloud services, you want to see, of course, first you need to identify your needs. Why is the reason there's a need to move over to the cloud? Then you evaluate your resources. You look at your resources, what do we have? And then determine the gaps. The same thing what you do when you do regular project management, application development thing. But what is interesting about the cloud services is that we have legacy applications 30 years old using, I don't even know if you guys know, Clipper Advantage. So since I've been the CIO of the CCC, I've been recruiting staff to do Clipper Advantage. I could not get, even if I do an SSS2, no one applies. When I send a note saying, what, you're going to be learning about, different cloud opportunities, I've got tons of people just doing, this is not even a promotion to some. Some people downgraded just because they wanted to be part of something that's out there that people hear. So, I know it is at first it is a little bit of a scare, but things are moving in that direction, and people has to get on with the program. Yeah. So basically, right now, it's easier for me to recruit being a small IT department than having to say, okay, we're still gonna do this legacy application. For years, no one applied. So, and then the service level agreement is important. With the partners, it is important to have the service level agreement. And of course, the traceability matrix. What is nice about partnering with the cloud service provider or a shared service is that, especially with small IT departments, their staff, instead of just the little 20 people in the group, they can be part of something. They're part of the service provider. They talk to the vendor. They're learning more than just being what they're used to. If I'm an access developer, in the past that is fine, but nowadays you're just sitting there doing access development and not interacting with everybody. That was the past of being a developer. But nowadays, with being in the service provider, working with your partners, you get to interact with our current project. Our main developer, who's going to be also the coder, her main responsibility right now is doing architecture. She is very thrilled that she's actually part of the architecture and be doing the development later. So in most custom application development, the developers don't even have time to be part of the architecting team. So those are the kind of changes that between the partner and our staff could have this good relationship.
Excellent. Yeah. What about you, Mike?
I agree. Everything is, your roles may change, or the people may maybe zoom in on maybe one or two roles versus maybe 5 or 6 that could have been over like whelming them anyway. So And I like it, and I think what our customers tell us too is that the nice thing is that you don't have to have a staff of 200. You just need a staff of 20. Let that cloud provider bring in the rest of the staff. So if you need more, that's their responsibility is to have more to keep that platform up. It's not yours. So that's
Stabilizes
nice.
that.
Yeah, that is nice. That's been we'll go into companies from 20 users to 2,000 to 20,000 users, and everyone's got a lot on their plate. A lot of them just like the fact that, oh, I'm glad you're taking care of that now. I could focus over here. And keep that going. And it's also, make sure it's an ongoing relationship. Don't set your model up that this is a transition. So if it's, that it's a transaction. So it's not a transaction relationship. If that's where you're going, you're probably not going to get a big bang for your buck here. Amazon is a transaction relationship a lot of times. You're just swapping dollars for different dollars. But if you're going to go to some other place that's going to really make it to a partnership, you're probably meeting with those folks a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good feed into. I like that into our next question. I'm going to actually exclude two of the panel members from this next question. This is a question for Rita. Feel free, guys, though, to jump in if you have to. But this is for Rita.
Pressure's on.
Yeah. So, how do you, in you specifically, how do you find the right partner in order to meet those objectives on what that is in a cloud provider or partner?
Okay, so yeah, it is very important. I think the key to success is with anything, but especially with the cloud, is the right partner, finding the right partner. And what we have done is that first you need to understand your requirements. You have to know, okay, do I, like security, what kind of security, if everybody says you need to be secure, but I'm doing word processing of something. I mean, why would you need a HIPAA?
Right.
So, so you need to be able to understand your requirements, what those are, and be able to map it with the right service provider or the right integrator. So, for example, a good example is human capital management. You would think human capital management is standardized with every single, everybody has personnel, everybody does timekeeping, everybody does scheduling. But I can guarantee one department will have certain ways that will just not conform to the norm. So when we did our recruitment, we were looking at, the whole thing is, a recruitment is a recruitment. What is so different than yours? When we did with the cloud computing, we use a managed service, meaning it is mostly configurable with very little customized fields. So that is because when we did our requirements, we found out that we can probably take 95% of what's out there. So the 5%, we found a vendor that could tailor it to us without messing their whole infrastructure. So that's important, that you need to know your requirements, because some of the cloud initiatives that I've talked to people, and they say, oh, I did not like the cloud because we failed, or the project failed. It's just because they did not find the right solution or partner. For our current initiative, what we have done is that, like I said, there's so many flavors of the cloud. You just have to find the right solution partner. Is that what we're doing right now? We need a cloud service. However, we can't go with just the mainstream what's out there, even though it's an HR human capital initiative, because we have a lot of customization. So you have to find a product that could accommodate that customization. So that's why it's important to have the partner. Also the SLA, make sure the exit strategy, okay, and just basically tracing your requirements to the service provider.
Yeah,
So that's I think it's a key.
Us three up here are biased. We'll tell you on how a good partner is, so I'm not going to go there. But let's go to our next question, because that feeds in right with what she was saying, and that's how do you build an exit strategy into an SLA? And what are your thoughts around that, Zenu?
So that's like asking, how do you plan for failure? Don't, right? But if you are to define some kind of an exit strategy, the one thing that comes to my mind is define how you want your data to come back to you, right? You give it to them in a format that you understand, that your organization ingests, your applications use. You put it out in the cloud 30, 40, whatever, 30 years, 40 years later, however long it goes, data changes. Make sure you tell them that whatever provider you work with, this is in what format I expect it. Also, I would encourage you to think about growth. If the cloud provider tells you have a week to export your data, at the time it was 500 terabytes, now it's grown to 700 terabytes, well, you need more time. It may be 2 weeks. So I would tell you to, I would leave you with those two thoughts.
That's a good one. What about you, Rita?
In terms of the exit strategy, what the cloud, I forgot to mention what the cloud provides with for us that made us successful in our first project is that, with the cloud, you don't have to deal with performance issues because it's in the SLA. Just as long as of course, this is you choose the right partner. You chose the right partner. So performance, availability, backup activities, sizing and capacity planning and security are some of the things that we did not have to plan in our project because it's already part of the SLAs. So, however, you still need to have your operational continuity, which is the exit strategy. So in our situation, what we have done is we actually have an in-house premise of our data. So in the data center at the resource agency, in our shared service in the data center, we have our data and we have replication of data from the cloud provider to us. We don't have any kind of like a GUI or things that people have direct access other than the administrator, the IT administrator. But that is like if something happens, that is your disaster recovery. We are able to continue operation. We may have some downtime, but we are able to get reports and things like that. Mm-hmm. Also, the in-house infrastructure that we have also interfaces with other state system, just because some state system is very limited of who they can interface. Mm-hmm. So you got to think about those kind of exit strategy. There's different types of exit strategy you can have, but it has to be part of your operational recovery plan.
Oh, absolutely. What about you, Mike?
I ask them if they have one. A lot of people don't have one. Because, if you go to some of these guys, depending on the size that you are, if you're going to try to change the general contract of AWS, you better be a
big guy.
Big fish. Or Microsoft. So that's part of it. I kind of think a little bit as a protection strategy, not just an exit, because a lot of these folks, too, may not have a DR plan, and you may assume that. So think of it more of a protection strategy. And part of it, like Rita's talking about, having that copy of that data, who owns the data. So there's a lot of cloud companies out there, so look at their financial records and understand where they're at. Because they could go away. If you recall, 2000, a few of us were around in 2000 in IT, ISPs just dropped off the face of the earth like that. So a little bit different. It was kind of a bummer when your ISP dropped. But now it's not your ISP. It could be a critical application, a critical data set. So think of your protection strategy.
And that's good. That fits into, we have about 3 minutes left. Just to summarize, these are some of the topics that we went over. And what I'd like to do with the remainder of our time, though, just because we only have a few minutes left, is let's open up the floor to some questions for the panelists or for any of us if you have any at this time.
Mike can't ask question, though.
None from you.
Ask all you want.
Now you got to ask.
Longer than 3 minutes.
Now you got to ask.
Now you got to do it. Come on.
Okay. So in an organization, you have, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, etc. So in developing a strategy, how do you know where to start? Which one do you pick first?
For a customer, for like an agency perspective, I always go back to Rita. What are your requirements? What are your needs? And also, you may want to pick something that's simple at first, depending on the length of list that you're trying to move to the cloud. So simple is nice. So kind of think of those things. Be very cautious. The most expensive thing that you could probably do is you named all of them there, and you go out and buy all of them, because there wasn't a good strategy about what your outcome, what you really wanted to.
Yeah.
The most expensive thing that you could do is go out and buy IaaS, and then start loading all of your stuff on top of that IaaS, and then need help with it, and then need application development with it, and all these other things. You're like, dang, it's been a year here, and I'm spending more versus just looking at the outcome.
Yeah. Good
So
point.
simply you need to start off with like software as a service, or
Could be something simple. Every culture is a little different. Every agency that I see anyway has a little bit different of a twist with it. And there's some things that you can and can't do depending on who you are too, as far as an agency goes. I would look at it and say it's just what's some of those simple things. Now, it may just be a core application like Rita's talking about with yours. That may be it. But before you just jump into it, be very cautious. A lot of people look at transactions here, and it costs you a lot of money. So looking at your requirements, looking at what would be success here. You got to define what is success, because there's probably gonna be people within your group that don't want you to do this.
Yep.
So kind of if you could manage that process at first.
And I think I would add that what's driving your cloud initiative?
Yeah.
Is it, more resources? Is it a financial decision? Is it a scalability perspective? Because again, the different platforms of cloud, they all offer different offerings. One may be more expensive than the other. So I think that you need to align your initiative to your strategy.
Yeah.
So to answer that, so to improve efficiency, lower costs, right? So we've been tasked to develop a cloud strategy roadmap and how we're gonna move our data center into the cloud over a period of time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to get
So,
ideas.
so here, if you keep it simple like that, like we have a customers that have that, and in your program, if you will, internally, is there's no more lights in our data center on. So that's what you're working towards. So depending on what your strategy is, if it's to move your whole data center or just an application, that's where you're kind of leading your group down that path. Because some people will all of a sudden start thinking of that, and they'll maybe move the first application, don't like it, and then there's all of a sudden this riff. Well, what are we doing? Well, we got to move everything else too with it. If you don't have it, depending on what you're trying to do, like move your whole data center, this isn't anything different than maybe if you've done data center consolidation projects, you've done your virtualization projects. You've got to have some of those strategies and some understanding with it so you could understand the experience. So if you just start leaping into it too fast without looking at your like requirements, getting a good understanding of the technology platform plus how it's going to work from your people and your processes, you're probably going to have a hard time with it. So, but we have customers that say that, hey, I want everything out of this data center into yours as a service, or maybe there's a hybrid thought. There's a lot of thought and talk around hybrid IT. So maybe it's not everything, and maybe there's some sort of a hybrid step here.
We do the hybrids with SaaS. We want to do all these things. You guys handle all of these capabilities, but we want to be the DBA of this particular app, and you do everything else. And that's a model that works for them.
In my experience, though, as the CIO, the way to be able to get funding, because sometimes the infrastructure as a service could be a problem if you don't really need to refresh your hardware right now. So you go, hey, I need $100,000 to move over to the cloud. And management's for what? Things are doing fine. Right. So for some people who have funding limitations, I would suggest that see if your most IT priority project fits into the cloud. Because if you say, by the way, we're replacing this very old application and the cloud makes sense, they couldn't care less whether it's a cloud or all they want is to replace that and you get your funding. So it's very important to know what your IT priority project is and then see if it meets the cloud. Typically, if someone says, you know what, I want to go to the cloud because it seems like the cool thing, it's normally going to fail because you will not have support, you will not have the funding.
Yep.
But if you're doing something that's important to the department, then you will have the support.
And that contract vehicle is a big deal. So I know with some agencies, we've actually built the cloud strategy off of a facility leasing contract. So,
yes, that is a possibility. Yeah, if you're your lease is about to go and you have the data center, maybe it's time to move to the cloud.
Yeah. So as you kind of try to figure out what you're trying to do and your funding for it and your contract vehicle for it, those have been some things that have come out of more of that, requirements, what are you trying to do conversation, and those things kind of bubble up, and you could, like what we're talking about is also, how do you get there? Like you said, your roadmap and your strategy to get there. It's easy if you got that out.
You guys gave an excellent talk, but Rita, you gave an exceptional talk.
There you go. 10. There you go.
Now's the time to fill out the questionnaire so you can get that Starbucks half a coffee. Half a coffee. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.